Alrighty, good morning, folks. Thanks so much for bearing with us as we were getting things set up here this morning. Glad to see so many faces here in the room, and don't want to take too much more of the time of all the gentlemen up here, but welcome to panel number 1 of our Sports Media Convergence Summit. This panel is "The Landscape is Changing. How do we change with it?" And our experts, we've got some state winners with us. First to my right is our Nebraska Sports Writer of the Year, Stu Pospisil, the high school sports editor and golf editor of the Omaha World-Herald, where he's been a writer for 37 years. 2021, he released his first solo book, Nebraska Golf Out of the Shadows, a Nebraska Lincoln graduate, and a member of the Omaha Public Schools Hall of Fame. Next, Chris Denari, Indiana Sportscaster of the Year, television voice of the Indiana Pacers for over 15 years, also extensive experience with the WNBA's Indiana Fever, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Radio Network, Fox 59 TV, and Butler University basketball. He's a Wabash College graduate and a member of that school's Athletic Hall of Fame for winning a national basketball championship at the Division III level. Next, Grant Paulsen, our Washington, D.C. Sportscaster of the Year, co-host of the popular Grant and Danny Show on 106.7 The Fan, WJFK. Also appears as a contributor nationally, MLB Network Radio and The Athletic, has play-by-play experience in the Arena Football League and the XFL. Grant is a George Mason University graduate and a Virginia native. And lastly, Gregg Bell is our Washington Sports Writer of the Year. He covers the Seattle Seahawks for the Tacoma News Tribune. He's covered the Seahawks since 2005. Prior to that, covered the Oakland Raiders from 2002 through 2004. An Army West Point graduate and a 10-year veteran of the United States Army. Attended graduate school for journalism at Cal Berkeley. So guys, take it away. And folks, whenever you have questions, when they open up the floor, I can bring you a mic, and you can feel free to ask these gentlemen questions. Thanks so much.
I think the first thing we wanted to do is just kind of go down the way, and we could talk about how we got into the business and how we got to where we are today. I think that would be instructive.
You want to go first?
Go for it.
Okay. Well, thank you. It's like I said, it's about 5 in the morning for me, so my mind's still grinding. I had a completely different career track. As you said, I was a West Point graduate, so I had an Army commitment, and I did that. And then they were going to send me to Korea on the DMZ to be a company commander as a captain for 18 months. And I said, okay, I'll get out now, please. Because I'd just gotten married, and that was the first real window I could leave the service without owing time. So I left. I went to graduate school, and what I want to do, I've always wanted to write, and I always wanted to write about sports. So I went to what I thought was the best journalism school on the West Coast, Cal Berkeley, and University of California, Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism. Very fortunate that I had something of a mentor, a former Marine officer at the Sacramento Bee came to our school on a recruiting visit to find interns, and he couldn't believe I'd been an Army officer and was in journalism, and hired me on the an intern for the Bee, supposed to be in Sacramento, and then they didn't have anyone covering the Oakland A's. Hudson, Mulder, Zito, Giambi years of the late 90s and early 2000s, and they said, you live in Oakland, instead of driving to Sacramento, just stay in Oakland and cover the A's. I said, great. And as a grad student of a 2-year program, I spent my second year covering the A's as a beat writer, and they sent me to spring training, and I would file one set of stories to my faculty at Cal Berkeley for school credit, and the other to my editor to go in the paper, the Sac Bee. And that's how I started. And the A's took off and went to the playoffs, and I stayed on the beat, and I never covered preps, and I never just went straight into Major League Baseball. I was fortunate. I was 27 at the time. And from there, my wife said, can you take a job that isn't 190 nights on the road a year? And so I went to the Associated Press. First, I covered the NFL, the Oakland Raiders for the Bee, and then I went to the Associated Press in Seattle. And that's how I got to Seattle. The other side, what's interesting about my career is the other side, to me is interesting, is the other side, I've seen the trend now toward teams owning their news and hiring journalists and former journalists to tell their story. And I worked at the University of Washington as a director of communications from 2010 to 14 as one of the first in the country. The University of Florida now has one, I think, for every sport. But I was one of the first in the country to do a former journalism to tell the school side. And then after 14, I went to the News Tribune to go back on the Seahawks beat. And that's where I've been since. Thank you.
So I think what you'll find is like every story is so different, right? As to how you kind of get into the business and get where you got. There's some links though, which is contacts and relationships, which is so pertinent in this business. And obviously you having a passion that you wanted to do it. So mine is really unique and weird. And this, when people ask about how do I get into the business, I always kind of disqualify myself because this is not a path most traveled. But when I was a little kid, I started calling into radio shows. And basically at around 10 or 11 years old, my uncle had a morning show in Pittsburgh, and it was not a sports show. He's not really a sports broadcaster, but everything they did, it was like a morning zoo kind of fun show, was about bits and laughs. So I would call in as his sports bookie, and this was way before, everyone was betting on sports on the air. And this was in, probably 1998 or something. And I was about 10 years old. And so I would call in. 10-year-old sports bookie? That's right, 10-year-old sports bookie. So I would call in and give him the lines and my picks for the game as a 10-year-old. And, it was just kind of a funny bit on the morning show. And then I started writing a little local, I'm from a small town in Virginia called King George. We have a newspaper that publishes once a week, the Journal. And so I started writing a small column in that. Local TV, Channel 9 did a story on it, would have me up on Fridays to do football picks ahead of the then Redskins games. And from there, just as, you would see on occasionally on the news or whatever, like kids that know the president's names or whatever, I would get to go as this like novelty kind of human interest thing. As a little kid, I would go on these, do TV appearances. So I got to go on the Letterman show, a bunch of different places. And I knew, when I was no longer cute or interesting or funny and I wasn't a child anymore and I grew facial hair, no one was having me on their shows. But based on that experience, I knew this is what I wanted to do. I got to cover a couple Super Bowls with the Letterman show and ABC Sports when I was 13 and 14 years old, and got access to players and locker room, and really it was a blast. So I knew, okay, I got a taste of that. They pulled me away from the water fountain, but I want to get back into it. So that's why I went to Mason journalism. I started as a assistant to our beat reporter on the Redskins beat at my local FM main sports talk station in D.C., 106.7 The Fan. And anything he needed, any kind of help getting audio, stringing things, posting stuff to our website, I would do. After one season, he left, and I'd kind of put in a lot of hours for not a lot of money. My program director made me the beat reporter right at the end of my time in college. And for 4 seasons, I covered the Redskins beat on the radio. Which was kind of an on-call job, hits all day long on the phone, going to every practice, every game, really great perks like flying around to NFL cities, and it was neat. And I did that for 4 years and then got our midday radio job from 10 to 2 every day, hosting a show, not just on the Redskins, who I was covering, but all the sports teams. And from there, after 4 years in middays, we got promoted to afternoon drive, where I've been the host from 2 to 6:30 on 106.7 The Fan with my co-host Danny. Since, and I've been lucky enough, as was mentioned, to do some national stuff with MLB Network Radio. One of my passions is minor league baseball and prospects, so I do a Sunday morning show where we talk about the draft coming up or prospects in the minor leagues, and that keeps me busy on the weekends. But really, more than anything, I would say I got lucky at a young age to know this is what I wanted to do, and as you guys, many of you have experienced, you get that taste, and it's so fun. You want to keep doing it. It beats working for a living, as I like to say.
Lucky and being in the right place at the right time, I think, are big keys. Great to see all of you here, and I would say, as Grant said, there's no cookie-cutter way to get to where any of us have been. I mean, it's all different, but for all of you, that are here, you're doing the right thing. You're here wanting to do what we do, and I think that's most important. For me, my dad was a high school teacher and a coach. And so I grew up sitting on a bench keeping stats when I was 5, 6 years old. I was probably the most lenient assist giver in the history of statisticians. I'm still a firm believer that if I pass Gregg the ball and he gets fouled and he makes 2 free throws, I don't understand why that's not an assist, right? I mean, so I was the most, I was pretty good at giving assists. That's why I think some of the guys, I'm 62 years old, so some of the guys are probably like 70 now. My dad, before he passed away, got a text from a guy that had played for him. He said, you know, I'm the all-time assist leader because of your son at the high school. So for me, I grew up, you know, dad a basketball coach, golf coach, teacher. I played high school basketball for my dad. I was very fortunate to play Division III basketball at Wabash. We won the '82 national championship. We won because we had a pretty darn good player in the middle, Pete Metzelars, who was drafted by the Seattle Seahawks and eventually played as the starting tight end on Buffalo's 4 Super Bowl teams. He was 6'8", 260 at the Division III level. He had 40 points in the national championship game in 1982. I was a very valuable reserve, but you know what? Valuable reserves get a ring too. So, but when I got to Wabash as a college freshman, I was the oldest of 5, so I was the first kid to go to school. I saw my dad crying, you know, because I was leaving, and he pointed over to like a table on the mall, and it said WNDY radio. And he said, you know, I think you'd be pretty good at that. You ought to go over there and talk to him. So I did, and from day one, I was on the air. I became the voice of the football team as a student my sophomore year, played basketball, so I couldn't do it. But that's when I knew, yeah, I think this might be something that I want to do. And Wabash is an all-male school, about 800 or 900 men just west of Indianapolis. And most of the graduates end up as an attorney, a doctor, working for a bank. And I was that rare guy that got my first job in Columbus, Indiana, making $10,000 to do radio. But for me, being in the right place at the right time, my wife and I have been married 39 years. We're high school sweethearts. We have 3 boys. Her commitment and passion to allow me to do what I've done over the last, 39 years, really 40 plus years we've been together, has been critical for my career. There's no question. Very fortunate to be the voice of the NBA team in my hometown. Again, being at the right place at the right time. Really, the thing that helped me the most with my brand in Indianapolis was being the voice of Butler basketball. I got the job in 1989, but that was just the side job. I was their first full-time associate athletic director for marketing and promotion. So my job was to generate income, whether it be through ticket sales or sponsorships or development, and doing the games was just a sidelight. But that was my passion. And as Butler got good, and we had no games at that time on television, the way you had to listen and follow Butler basketball was on radio. And that helped me in the marketplace. And so that led to opportunities to be the Turn 4 announcer at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway for the 500, which I've done for more than 20 years. I've been the voice of the high school state finals, during my tenure. Got selected by the Pacers when they brought a WNBA franchise to town to be the first radio TV voice of the WNBA team, and that really helped me become the voice of the Pacers back in 2006. So, it's just being at the right place at the right time, having a good work ethic, being relatable to people, doing things like this. Those are all the things that I think it takes to get to where we are. I've always said there are better broadcasters than me, I believe. I mean, I think I'm good, but I know there are a lot of people that maybe have more talent than me, but I don't think anybody's going to outwork me. I'm going to be a good person. I'm going to build relationships. When I'm at the gas station putting gas in my car and somebody comes up and wants to talk about the Pacers, I may talk to them for 15 minutes. Those are the things I think when you're representing a team that are most important. It's not just preparing for the game and doing the game. It's 365 days a year being a person that represents the franchise. So thrilled to be here, very honored to get the award in Indiana, and look forward, anytime during the weekend, happy to visit with people and share experiences.
Well, my story kind of blends all of the previous themes of timing and relationships. And I was a Sportsnet in high school, sports editor for newspaper and yearbook, and went to Nebraska, but I was an actuarial student. And between having 3 freshman football players in my room or the next room and the advent of Budweiser as part of the diet, the math class didn't work out. Fortunate to be sitting one night at a National Merit Dinner with the assistant dean of the journalism college. She says, if you're not doing well, come over, we'll get you transferred the next day. So I went to my second career, haven't turned back. I got a job with a weekly paper, Omaha Sun, while I was in college. Was there 2.5 years until that folded. And so I did some stringing while I was still in college. Another piece of timing, I was at the World-Herald applying for summer work or intern, and they said, well, our Southwest Iowa writer had just had a heart attack and we need somebody to work summer desk. I said, okay, I'll be in on Monday. And that was the start of what is now 39 full years. I'm in my 40th year at the paper. I haven't had to apply for any other jobs. I've enjoyed my time with the newspaper. I started out covering Metro High School sports in 1990. I became only the 4th to be the statewide prep editor, which entails all state teams, statewide rankings, being the ambassador. You talk about being at the gas station and what have you. I've been to probably 250 of the 300 high schools in the state, and you're the ambassador for the paper. You wave the flag, even now in these changing times. I'm one of the ones, along with our columnist and maybe 1 or 2 others at the paper, that they know the most, and you better treat them well, and they expect that, and they respect that, and you respect them. So I've been the lead high school writer since 1990. I've been the golf editor since 1987. For me, the most exciting part of that job is Nebraska has had such a influx of golf championship, world-class golf courses, starting with Sandhills, which was a Ben Crenshaw, Bill Core design in 1995. I spent 4 hours with Ben Crenshaw when the course was in the dirt. I've been able to meet most of the great architects of this world with their Nebraska projects, and we continue to have them. And so I've branched out. I've become a author, Nebraska Golf Out of the Shadows. I've got some of those to sell today, and as the landscape keeps changing, past couple of years, I've written a weekly column on Omaha's town history. So not just sports, but cultural and political, and that gets as much drive as the metrics and the matrices, and that drives as much as anything. So I've got a whole new audience as I kind of start my final chapter, and look forward to publishing those columns in the next couple of years and continuing to just branch out. So my personal landscape is changing, and I think we'll take it back down the line. But just from when I started, we were sending stories by using the rotary telephones with big suitcases worth of it'd be a keyboard and a transmission base, and then you went to using fax lines, and now with wireless, it's a whole new ball game. But at the same time, you're also asked to do so much more in newspapers, and I think the electronic as well. For instance, the World-Herald, our quota each month is 189 videos that the newsroom, which was once 185, is now 38. But we're expected to produce 187 videos. So when you go out, you cover a game, you're doing a feature story, you're getting the video. Fortunately, we have an online team that through Dropbox we can let them edit and polish it up. But it's stuff, along with deadlines that have moved up 3 hours because of how printing plants have changed and consolidated. We print like 7 daily newspapers, so it's, you know, the old midnight deadline is now 9:30, and you're trying to, you know, write your best stuff. And I do most of my game coverage now in column form, trying to pick out the best thing, and the play-by-play is dead. And not everybody in our state, and I think a lot of the smaller papers across the country still have writers that, you know, you've got to be the paper of record, but you got to keep your audience entertained. And I'd say the last thing that has really helped me with the changing landscape is voice transcription. I use Otter AI, and it cuts my writing time in half.
How many of you know what Otter AI is? Great tool. If you don't know it, subscribe. Google it. Doesn't cost a lot. You get a standard package. It's basically free, and you can get 45 minutes of audio on your recording device, transcribe it in 2 seconds.
How accurate is it?
You have to polish it up a little bit.
I'd say 80%.
Yeah, it's enough to, certainly, and if you have a question you need to directly quote the story, you go back and listen to it, but it's sure better than transcribing 45 minutes of audio.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, with the earlier deadlines, it's just sped up the process, and I think I write better stories as a result. How about what's been changing with yours?
Yeah, I was going to say, how many of you, when you watch a game, have a second screen in front of you? iPad, iPhone, Android. Yeah, I'm the same. And I think as a broadcaster, we think about that. I know that the viewer is always not paying 100% attention to our telecast. I mean, I'm the same way. I'm sitting on my couch watching whatever, and I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm checking stats. So I think a lot of that helps us understand how we have to deliver the game, you know, from a graphics package standpoint, from, you know, how I interact with our analysts, those types of things. I mean, those are things that I think have changed. I mean, as a kid, you know, I was lucky enough on a Saturday to maybe get 1 game a week, and you were locked in. One, you didn't have a remote that you could switch around, so you paid attention 100% of the time to the actual game that you were watching on the screen. That's not how we all view games now, especially when we're watching on television. So I think as a broadcaster, we have to think about those things as we do it. And again, I think, you know, to all of these points, I mean, think about many, many years ago, he was just a writer. Now he is a multimedia journalist. And so I think it's the flexibility that you have and the ability to do a number of different things will, I mean, we all said that years ago, but it's even more in tune now as how versatile you need to be.
By the way, Stu and I are out on loan from the Museum of Natural History, I think. Yes. 65 years combined in newspapers. It's so different. Thank you. It's so hard to stay in the newspaper game now in 40 years. I'm blown away. But to the point of how game coverage has changed, if you want to get into this and think you're going to write, this guy threw for 300 yards, this guy scored 35 points with 20 rebounds, everyone already has that on their phone. So that's not your job. They either saw the game because it's on every single Division I game on television, and Wabash is on television, or they were at the game, or their friend told them about the game on Snapgram and InstaChat and TalkTick. So your job now is to take the reader and the viewer and the listener beyond that into a place that they can't get on social media or from watching the game. And that's the personalities, that's the insight that a lot of people don't see. Those are outside journalism, or say that print journalism's dead, or they don't see that the value of us is not to tell you what happened, it's to bring you closer to why it happened and to learn about the people who made it happen. And that has become our job. And that would be our charge to you, is bring those players and coaches and personalities to life in your reporting and your writing that no one can get on Twitter and no one can get from just watching the game. And I'm sure we all have stories to that regard, but our career has pivoted to the point where that has become our lifeline. That's vital, or else there's no reason to read and watch us. And so it takes a little bit of work, but it is much different than it used to be, where you just tell everybody who won and what the score was and how many points somebody scored.
Can I take this for a minute?
Yeah, go for it.
I found this online the other night that, just the landscape with Gen Zs, only 58% say they enjoy live sports. That's just incredible. Only 23% of Gen Zers say they are passionate sports fans, compared to 42% of millennials, 33% of Gen Xers, and 31% of baby boomers. 27% of Gen Zers say they dislike sports altogether. So we are dealing with a base that is changing and shrinking, and a lot of it's, and I've got 13-year-old twin sons at home. They don't read the sports page. They don't even read the newspaper. They're not being taught that in school to begin with. And I've got them kind of interested in baseball and football, but by and large, they don't pick up a whole lot of news, and we don't let them yet on Twitter or social media, but it's scary, these numbers.
Those of you that are students, how many of you know what a newspaper is? It's actually printed product. How many of you held one in a hand before? You're above.
That's pretty good. Yeah, I was going to tell you from that standpoint, those are the numbers, and that's what we're talking about, the consuming the live game. We had a game earlier this year where we're in LA playing the Lakers. We're down 19 early in the fourth quarter. We end up winning the game. One of our rookies, Andrew Nemhard, who played at Gonzaga, hits a 3 at the buzzer to win. Just a phenomenal game. Our TV ratings were good. It was a late night game, but I get a phone call the next morning. I'm in LA. I get a phone call from my son. He's 33, lives in Myrtle Beach, married, and he'll watch occasional games. But he goes, "Dad, you've got 1 million hits on Instagram." Think about it. That's how people consume, right? They didn't see the game. They didn't watch the game, but they saw the Instagram hit. And so those are things that you think of, when you're doing that.
That's how kids determine whether we're cool or not.
Right. Well, it's funny, not just kids. So about a week and a half ago, the Wizards just announced they've got a new team president, Michael Winger, who came over from the Clippers, new GM, and Will Dawkins, who came over from the Thunder. So we were broadcasting live from their press conference, and we were getting Winger on and Dawkins on. And Ted Leonsis, who's the owner of the Wizards, the Capitals, the Mystics, a bunch of the teams in D.C., is kind of walking around. And my producer had asked him to come on the show. And I've known him since I was a little kid. I've interviewed him many times. And I don't know if he was asking specifically to see if he was going to sit down with us or not. But he comes over to the table and he goes, "How many followers do you have on Twitter?" Like, what a weird question to ask, right? But I don't know if he was like gauging credibility or is this worth my time or whatever. Yeah. And he ends up sitting down and talking to us. But there's a lot of better metrics, I would say, to determine if that was worth your while. So he went from doing Woj's podcast for 30 minutes to sitting down with us for 20. But just to speak to how things are gauged and how your influence is perceived, which is something I wanted to get into. First of all, I think the best advice, and as far as the changing landscape goes, the most pertinent thing I think any of us could acknowledge is whatever it is that you want to do, your goal or whatever you're working in, you don't just get to do that. So I am up here as the DC Broadcaster of the Year for the radio show that I do. I do TV appearances that are contracted now through the radio station, not even the stuff I do as an analyst for part-time work that I get on my own to have side money. I mean, my radio deal calls for me to do TV hits from the station with TV networks in town. That comes with my job. I write for our station site occasionally. That's not something that I went to them and said I wanted to do. That's something, as we're paying you, companies like paying you less than they've ever liked paying you before, so you're going to do more things for the money that you've already kind of agreed to. So now you're writing as well. It's funny, my uncle, who I mentioned was in radio years ago, and certain mentors of mine can't believe how often I'm on social media. I don't watch games without Twitter. I don't not live tweet Wizards Pacers. And I view it as part of my job. Now, no one has ever told me specifically, we wanted to, the trade just went down. The Capitals are sending Evgeny Kuznetsov somewhere, let's say. No one's ever told me you have to tweet. But if you are not engaging with my audience until 2 o'clock the next day, I've lost in a lot of ways. And that's so critical. So I think social media presence is vital. But at this point, frankly, we're getting to a point now where if I don't have a video response out or some type of, you can make money off of a YouTube following at this point where you're on YouTube and you're reacting to everything going on. So I just think the more versatile you are, it's not even, there was a time years ago where I would have said it's beneficial or it's ideal. It's now necessary, vital, necessity, pertinent. Like there's no way around it. But the other thing I would say too is in terms of even radio, video has become now massive because everything's about, if we do a 4.5-hour show that only lives on the air, that's great. Most of what we're doing has to live digitally. It's a lot of, we're stressing podcast numbers, getting people to listen, tweeting things out on social media. But engagement skyrockets with pictures and video. So if you just see a tweet from someone saying, hey, Grant and Danny just had Ted Leonsis on, he says the Wizards might trade Bradley Beal, that's going to get X number of people to click. But if there's a video of Leonsis saying it, the numbers, the analytics all say people will actually watch. So when you, whatever your favorite radio show is in your market, they're probably streaming now, whether it's on Twitch or on YouTube. And if not, we strategically record what we do and post it after the fact because we still believe to drive people to the radio to get our numbers is better. But if you don't have the ability afterwards to clip things off and post it now, it's almost like it didn't happen. I mean, your audience is huge and important, but the goal is not anymore just to appease your audience. It's to add new audience too. And I think the best way to do that is to outreach basically by way of whatever you can get with people that aren't already getting, whether it's subscribing to The Athletic, subscribing to your newspaper, what have you.
The other reason video is now what we have to do is that our stations and our newspapers and our websites can monetize it. And they can sell ads. What do I mean by that? They can sell ads. And in my paper's instance, they get more by me posting Seahawk videos, which are the most read videos on our site. They get more from that than they would from selling advertising on the website to the stories themselves. There are contracts with YouTube, contractors with these other video production service. The videos they can monetize in about 10 avenues instead of just a static ad on a website. And yet, as Stu mentioned, they're not hiring extra videographers to come out and help do the video. You're doing the videos. So you take your phone and make the video, and in my case, I go from the Seahawks locker room. If it's breaking and something that's very interesting, I'll step outside the locker room and I'll post it from the hallway of Ford Field in Detroit and edit it, trim it, put a headline on it, put a keyframe of a picture from the video on it, and post it in 3 minutes and go back in the locker room and continue doing my interviews. And the metrics show, by the way, the metrics, that's how we are judged, for better or worse. How many clicks are you getting? What's your Nielsen rating? That is what the commerce of what our bosses say how good of a job you're doing. Not how great that story was or how great the Nembhard shot was to beat the Lakers. How many watched it? Like your son said. Well, you got 1 million. What about the game?
Well, and the tough thing for you, and I would say for me too, and eventually for you guys, the young people getting into this, you're not really able to dictate ratings necessarily. If the Pacers win 26 games and nobody cares, you can paint a Mona Lisa every night, nobody's watching, right? Everyone goes, well, how are your ratings? And I go, how are the DC sports teams doing? Yeah. Pretty much, is there interest? Are you choosing me over, in our town in DC, NPR is kind of our top competitor, which is kind of a non-commercial, long-form politics and news. But some of it is dictated to you in a lot of ways, I would say.
Winning matters. And I look at the guys here from Alabama, Alabama football, Alabama basketball. I am a Cincinnati Reds fan, tried and true. I was there Friday night when Ellie De La Cruz went for the cycle. But to your point, wins, we always say it's the guys or the gals in the shorts that dictate, who's watching. Case in point about the Reds. Back in April, I mean, they had a young team that, honestly, as a Reds fan, I knew about 5 of the players coming out of spring training. in April, they had the lowest attendance in the history of Great American Ballpark. They announced 7,000. We all know that when you announce 7,000, it was probably more like 4,500. Friday night, they had won 11 straight. They had 42,000, standing room only. The Atlanta Braves were in town. There were a lot of Braves fans there. But winning creates excitement, and excitement creates ratings, and excitement creates a lot of things. So you are beholden a little bit to how your team performs. And you try to ride that wave when you're the broadcaster. But the one thing I'll say is, even in those years where, 2 years ago the Pacers won 25 games, I still was like, every night you got to bring it, because there are fans that are your diehards. There are fans that this may be the only game they watch all year, and they deserve your best. So even if your team, and it's a tough one, even if your team is bad, I sit there and go, I'm still doing games in the NBA, right? I still have a great job. It just will be better if the team wins.
Should we take some questions, you think? 10, yeah, we got about 10 minutes. And we should all maybe end with a final thought, too. But who's got questions? That would be, if anybody's got a question. Yes. We got a mic we can pass around, press conference style.
Hey. I have a question about how you balance your appeal among generations. You talked about Gen Z and their interests, but the people that make up Gen Z and millennials are still a minority of Americans. I think the average age of American is like 39 years old. When you're producing content or when you're on the air, knowing that young people usually generate engagement and older people usually generate money, how do you balance those two things amongst them, and the way that you phrase content maybe, or when you're on the air, how do you balance between the generations, knowing that a majority are older?
I think depending on your job, everyone might have a different answer. I think you just have to know exactly who your audience is, who you're appealing to. So for me, my ratings are generated, are what we're appealing to is men 25 to 54. Sports talk radio / they used to call it guy talk. Now it's more just like, non-sports conversation. But, that's not to say, like, I was out at dinner the other night and a lady came up to me and said she listens every day. Like, we're doing a show for everybody, but our advertising, who we sell to, is men 25 to 54. So that's oftentimes who I'm always kind of thinking about speaking to on the air. That said, when I'm on television doing Caps pre and post, that's a very different, it's a Caps fan. It could be an 18-year-old Caps fan. I think you're a chameleon in some ways. It's who is your audience in that moment. But I think also, to your point, people do take things in differently. And at least for me, it's based on the air, we're doing the conversation that we know our listening audience has. If we're then posting something after the fact on TikTok for a younger audience, you may be able to talk about something that is more interesting to them. Like, we try to think about some of those things. But just generally speaking, I think what is your brand? For me, it's nuts and bolts, hardcore sports, trying to be analytical or a little, sharp information. That's kind of what I like to sell myself as. So it doesn't matter if you're a young person or an old person. I try to stick to the script on kind of what people expect when they come from me.
We'll go to other questions.
I was just going to make one. The one thing I was going to mention is the hardest part from a TV game broadcast now is how you deal with analytics, right? Because there are some people that want to know every little bit of minutia, points per possession, who knows what WAR is, or PER. And the dilemma you have is we sort of say, if you put a graphic up, you better be able to explain it in 5 to 7 seconds, no longer. Because if you put a graphic up with all these analytics and there's all these numbers up, most of your audience is going to get lost. So there's part of us that believe, because all of you have your laptop or your iPad or your phone, that if you really want those analytics, you'll find it as you're watching the game. And if we provide, analytics are good, but if we provide too much, it goes over most of the audience's head. And I sort of use it. I'll talk to I've got 3 sons, 33, 30, and 27. And a lot of times I'll ask them, what do you think if we show you this? And if my 30-year-old who loves sports looks at me and goes, you don't need to use that. That's sort of how we'll gauge it.
Yeah, a question for Greg as a beat reporter. When you talk about video that you're doing from the locker room, is that just straight raw? You're interviewing a player and then you edit it there. Do you have a certain format or kind of software that you use with your newspaper, or is that just kind of raw on your iPhone?
We use Conatix. We used to use Brightcove. Now we use Conatix, which is a lot easier to post, but not so easy to actually create. I have a Conatix app on my phone. I just go to the video, the normal, like you would take videos of your family. I take them as locker room videos. Fans love to see the inside of the locker room. I could post a picture or video of the wall of the locker room and people would look at it just because you're inside an NFL locker room. Oh boy. So I try to maximize the opportunities to do that. The problem is, as we all know, a post-game locker room, I'm sure even the students here know, it's a mosh pit of equipment, of people. I mean, it depends what stadiums you're in. The LA Coliseum, when the Rams used to play. Exactly. There's no room. We used to have to do it at the LA Coliseum out in the hall, outside the locker room. And then there's the mosh pit of you're 4 deep in a gaggle of reporters behind the star running back for the game. So I help some over 6 feet, but I stand up tall and point down and hope that the little baby that's bass bamming in the background doesn't ruin my video. I don't know if I can hear it or not. We'll find out. I just post it anyway. And then after a game, I write a story that's on deadline. Stu knows about this. My deadline, by the way, has moved from 10 p.m. to 2 p.m. I can tell you about that. So a lot of my game stories don't even get in the paper because they don't care about the paper because they can't monetize it like they can the internet. I write a breaking game story as the game's ending. I hit send. It's from my AP days. Get it on the wire within 5 minutes of the game ending. I hit send as soon as the game ends. That's a kind of a running more of a nuts and bolts game story. But because as we said, everyone's watched the game, I write from an analysis piece, why they happened. And I write a lot at halftime of trends I saw in the first half that had to do with the game before. When you're a beat writer, you're really a novelist who's writing the big, long story of what the game's leading up to it, the context of, and then what this game means toward the rest of the season. And we don't chronicle an individual game as we are an entire novel of a story of a Pacers season, of a high school season. And then I would go downstairs, get the quotes, come back upstairs, put the quotes in the story. We called it a write-through when I was at the AP. And then I go downstairs onto the field, and in my bag and up in my room, I have a little tripod that I hook onto railings of the Superdome or garbage cans behind the bench, and I do my own video stand-up analysis of the game. And just off the top of my head, the highlights of the story I just wrote. And those stand-up videos on the field, 3.5 hours after the game with leaf blowers in the background and the stadium empty, are the most read watched videos of my newspaper. They said, "Great, keep doing it." And they're like 5 minutes long. So video has changed my job. I'm not a videographer. I don't know how to do that stuff. It's completely different than it used to be. 2 more questions. I think the room's empty after this at 10, so if you all have time, we can hang out.
Well, and maybe you, fledgling journalists, you may be starting out in preps. With, if you go into print journalism, that's changed. I mean, until a couple of years ago, I was walking sidelines. You got to keep your own stats to begin with. You don't. It's not like you've got a college sports information department or the electronic stats packages, and even with college, you talk about being able to get into locker rooms. Our guys don't get into locker rooms. You're standing out. You usually have a backdrop and exactly. But getting back to preps, I now have to be sure I can cover a game in a press box because you're having to write as you go. You have to tweet. You're going to have to do some type of video, and it's just changed. You lose a little bit of the flavor by not being able to be on the sidelines, being close to, that was one thing that maybe separated us from the college and the pro writers, because you're certainly in press boxes. Well, a lot of the high school places I go to, and Doug Duda, who's our Nebraska sportscaster, can attest, high school press boxes can be anything from a crow's nest to something that's pretty small college nights, and you just have to adapt to what's there that night. And but having to be doing all the other electronic things has really changed how you can even cover a prep game.
For Greg and Stu, as you guys know, layoffs and cuts have hit newspapers extremely hard for a long time now. What gives you hope, if anything, that will stop that trend and there will be kind of a successful transition to digital print media?
Well, certainly, I work for Lee Enterprises, which has about 75 papers. They have taken all but the 20 largest beginning June or July 15th to 3-day-a-week printing. Now, I can live with that, and I think, like the World-Herald has about 50-50 split. We're 35,000 print, we're 35,000 digital. As long as we continue to provide an electronic page where it's the facsimile of the printed page, I think we'll be all right, and the transition will be smooth. If for some reason the bean counters decide we're going to go a la carte and just post as you go along during the day, I think our subscriber base will dwindle. I don't think that print base will come over, and I think that digital base will go away. So at least what I've heard for the Lee newspapers is that those going 3 days a week will still have an electronic edition facsimile of the newspaper for the days they are not actually printing. And what happened, besides being able to monetize digitally, with print, you've got carriers, you've got print, and you have ink. And if they can eliminate all that, and because digital doesn't cost you anything for distribution, and that's, you know, I mean, but we've got, in Nebraska, we've got a loyal base of people, you know, still, you know, let's say 55 and up, that enjoy their morning coffee and a newspaper, be it the Lincoln Journal-Star, World-Herald, North Platte Telegraph, and we're all under one big umbrella right now, and that kind of that's been another change, because now we share stories. Journal-Star and the World-Herald would never share a story 4 years ago. Now our Husker coverage is a blend of both the Lincoln and Omaha papers.
I'm glad you asked this question, because this is real. This is all of us, broadcast, print, everyone in Winston-Salem this weekend, this is real. Just as an aside, my newspaper, when I joined it in 2014, it's a McClatchy newspaper headquartered in Sacramento, had 125 employees, its own print press, its own building in Tacoma. Anyone want to guess how many employees are on the News Tribune's payroll today? 21. We have no secretaries, we have no building, we have no print press. It's done in Vancouver, Washington. That's why my deadlines are at 2 p.m. So this is absolutely real. But I will tell all of you this, and I tell everybody, young and old, especially young, and I truly believe this. If you tell a compelling story and you tell people stories to other people, everyone has a mom and dad, everyone has a background, everyone has a why they are where they are, why they do what they do. If you become really good at telling that, there always will be an audience for it. Whether the medium changes, whether your deadlines change, whether it's online or print goes away, the actual printed word of stories, compelling stories that people can relate to, will never go away. And that is the charge of all of us, is, as I said, don't tell the score. Don't tell who scored 30 and went triple-double. Tell the people story of how they got to where they are today. And everyone has that story. That's the great thing about sports. Every team changes every year. Every college has new recruits. Every NFL team has new signings. There are those stories every single day that change. And that's where you need to go, is go find the kid and ask him, how'd you get to where you are today? What was your high school coach like? What'd your mom and dad do? Who's significant other that raised you? And what made you what you are? And they will love to tell you. Have a passion for storytelling, and there will always be an audience for it. It is discouraging. It's touch and go. The pay is often not great. I'm fortunate to be married to a super intelligent, great wife in healthcare at Children's Hospital in Seattle, which allows me to do what I do. but I just tell stories that matter to people, you know, and it really does encourage us to see all of you here, the students especially. I think the greatest thing about this weekend, it's my second time being here, is the students that get to come, because that tells us that there are people who want to tell stories. So keep telling those stories.
Well, the last thing I would say too is, there, as you just said, like there is a reality that is somewhat discouraging if you allow it to be. I really genuinely mean this though, and I don't know if you guys agree. I think this is arguably, like you've heard about some of the bad things about the timing of you getting into the business if you're a young person. I think there's probably never been a better time in some ways too for this perspective. I'm in the number 6 media market in the country. At night, right now, our hosts on our overtime show are 23 and 24 years old. Because stations, you know, it used to be that the people that were hosting those shows I've known for 30 years. They're not getting to host those shows anymore. The opportunities for younger people right now are incredible because staffs are giving those chances. In the number 6 media market in the country, I used to have to, again, I was the assistant to a beat reporter and then a beat reporter, and then I got to host middays and then afternoons. It's just not like that anymore. I'm 35 and I'm really young doing what I'm doing. But now I'm one of the older guys on our staff, and the young women and the young men that are coming up doing updates initially, like opportunities are being given to people with less experience that are younger, and the ones that are really good and talented and take advantage are flying in the industry. And it didn't used to be like that, frankly. That's a really good thing. And I always tell everyone, especially the young people, like act as if you run your Twitter account starting in high school and in college, like you're the beat reporter at Alabama, and you're doing the post-game videos, and you're doing a podcast, which anyone can do, and you're doing your own video cast leading up to the game against Auburn and every matchup all week long. You can do everything we do without the platform and the audience. You're getting the reps. You're getting good on air. That's the whole point. If you're acting as if, when I was in high school, I would just tweet out news. My buddy would tell me, so-and-so starting at quarterback. And I would like tweet it out as the beat reporter for the Foxes. It's like 2-18 no one cared about. But you're just acting as if, right? And you're covering the beat of the team without the job, without the money. You're posting the videos. You can get more experience at a high level now than ever before. The same exact way we do things, just fewer people seeing it. And by the way, you can get jobs faster and younger now than ever before too. It's pretty cool in that way.
The other reason you get jobs faster and younger now, frankly, it's cheaper.
That's why. Yeah.
Well, the other thing is where the growth has been is teams. From a Pacer Sports and Entertainment standpoint, I'm going to say 10 years ago we had 2 people in digital. We have 15 now in digital that are creating content, that are creating videos. We have a person responsible for Twitter, for TikTok, all those kinds of things. They get access that maybe the beat writer from the Indianapolis Star doesn't get. I watched Purdue basketball this year. They were in they made a last-second shot to win the game. You know how you saw they literally had a camera and video in the huddle as Matt Painter was diagramming the play, and then after the game they released it on social media. It was fascinating. Teams are starting in schools, and they're starting, I don't want to say they're controlling it, but they're giving, yeah, they are. They're giving access. Yeah. And so, but that was cool. You've never seen that before. But now, institutions, universities, pro teams, they're taking advantage of that access that they can give their own people.
Well, we've got an NIL seminar coming later. You know, there's some schools where the athletes have NIL deals that they're only going to speak to certain reporters. And that's troublesome for the media group as a whole. And another aspect, yeah, you have your podcast and you have everybody, you know, who decides who gets in the press boxes? How does the access be determined, and how do you measure total audience? And that's something that the access givers have to decide who deserves to be in there and who doesn't.
I think all of us, you know, we're here for two more days, so more than happy to visit with each of you individually. If you have questions, I'm 62. I've still got some good years left, but I'm clearly near the end, and I'm happy to pay it forward.
Thank you, guys.